It's been really exciting to see that we have such a big group of participants. First of all, I hope it's okay for you if we're recording this call, which my colleague now has started. It would be really great for others to go back with this. So please let us know in the chat if that is something that you're not okay with. Okay, great. All right, so welcome to our first webinar that we organized with the FabCity Foundation and Centrinno, the Centrinno project together. My name is Francie. I'm going to introduce myself in a moment, but first of all, I wanted to give you a little introduction into what we will be covering today. So again, I'm Francie. I work for the Metabolic Institute. We are an Amsterdam-based organization working a lot on the circular economy and sustainability. The Institute in particular works with many research projects, long-term EU research projects, in which we help several pilots to transition to a circular state. And more specifically, I have been involved in a project called CENTRINNO. I don't know if any of you, maybe we can have a raise of hands here. Who has heard of CENTRINNO before? Have you heard of this through the FabCity Foundation? Yeah, Ava has heard, my colleague. Okay, not a few people, good. I will give a bit of an introduction to CENTRINNO because I want us to be all on the same page. But basically, I've been on CENTRINNO as a researcher and a lead of the metabolic work within this project already for 3 years. And we come to this very exciting moment in time in which we are sharing some of the tools and methods that we have worked with our pilots in CENTRINNO together to really see how you, speaking on FabCities, but also other organizations, can use these same tools and methods in your own context. So I'm really, really looking forward to hearing your opinion also after, your true and honest opinion, what you're thinking. So please feel free and don't be shy to write questions and comments into the chat throughout the presentation. I thought I'm going to start with a bit of a map of where you are actually all from, because in the last days I have been, really excitedly following the sign-up sheet for this. And this isn't all of yours. I've already seen somebody from Ghana, for example, but only from the people who have mentioned the city that they are from. As you can see here, I'm covering a broad range of participants from all over the world. Let's hope some of them also sign up and they're not still sleeping, speaking about the people who are coming from South America, for example. So this is extremely exciting for us also to test our ideas and thoughts within such a diverse group of people. Mostly we are here represented the NGOs. You can actually, it's unfortunately cut off, but the pink one here is mostly non-for-profit organizations. And we have quite a few people also from academia, the fewest people from the public sector, which is interesting to me. But it will be also very exciting to hear such a broad perspective from you afterwards. So,
Francie, is there a possibility to get on the map? We get a question from the chat.
Yes, of course. Well, this map here is just, I made this very quickly just to get you an idea of where you are all from. I can put you on the map, but I guess this map won't be really shared somewhere else. It was just for the presentation to see. One other comment that I also had is a lot of you are from FabCities that already exist, but some of you aren't. I had a few who are interested in joining one or founding one. So it will also be very, very nice for you to use as a networking opportunity. And if you are open to receive messages or contacts from people who don't have a FabCity yet, also make sure that you are sharing if you are open to receive emails or contacts. So what we want to cover today, going into here, I want to first give you a short intro into CENTRINNO for those of you who don't know CENTRINNO yet. Then I will take you on a tiny excursion into the past, because of course we are here to talk a bit about the circular economy and circular ecosystems within cities. So I want to take a bit of a historical excursion into cities and the circular economy before then really talking about why should FabCities care about this. And then number 4 on this list is really what we will spend most time on. That is, what is the Centrinno cartography and how can we really use it to foster circular ecosystems and circular communities within FAB cities? And then, most important, the discussion in the end. Again, I think it would be extremely valuable for us that if you are honest and open and share your questions with us. As a house rule, of course, I would like to see your faces. So if you want, please do turn your camera on. We stay muted unless you are speaking. And we thought that it would be nice during the presentation. I'm happy to take questions too. If you just post them in the chat, Jette will guide them towards me. And then, of course, if we are in the discussion in the end, then you can just raise your hand and we will make an interactive session like that.
Yeah, we actually already have a question from the chat. And it says, is it only about cities? Because we are a FAB region.
Yes, I also got an email, maybe it was this email too, a really nice question. Of course, this is also okay for regions. For us, this is really about the community. You can also apply the same thinking in a region. And we'll also have a few examples of Centrinno pilots who are not cities. So this should be hopefully relevant for you too. Thanks for that question. Okay. Speaking about Centrinno a little bit. So in a nutshell, Centrinno is an EU-funded project which helps to turn former industrial sites, this is within cities, but it doesn't have to be, into the hubs of a FAB city, in which for us, a FAB city hub really is that center in which we can build a community of innovation, of circular production, of education. And these FAB city hubs are hosted mostly in our pilots within old industrial spaces that once were the hearts of production in the industrial era in Europe, but now are really becoming something new. And we're trying to make them into these really engaging centers of innovation and learning and exchange. Circularity is a really big point here for us, which we will talk about today, because we think they are great places to instill a feeling of a circular community within cities. We have worked in Centrinno with 9 pilot cities all across Europe, as you can see here on that map. And I thought it just would be nice to give you an insight into 3 of them, just to give you an idea of what different topics these pilots have covered. For example, we have Iceland. This is actually now one city that isn't a city, but a region, a rural area in Iceland. Which is looking into converting an old women's college there into a textile innovation center. A really, really interesting pilot, and they work a lot with creating a countrywide innovation network around wool and how can we reuse wool resources and create a more sustainable future for the heritage industry of knitting and wool textile sector in Iceland. The next that I wanted to just dive into is Tallinn. I actually had the chance to visit this pilot already in my first year in Centrinno. They are converting this beautiful old community space that used to be for sailors into a new community space in which they run a lot of workshops. They made a maker space in this building now, and circularity really is at the key. They do a lot on permaculture, on composting and food waste reduction. And really here, this is a community-focused pilot in which they are really trying to create a center for circular learning, including the different members of the local community. Very nice to see. The last one that I wanted to just dive into before going into the 2 stories of the past is Geneva. In Geneva, I also got to visit this pilot a few weeks ago. We are working with an organization called Lamaco, which is it stands for Manufacture Collaborative Manufacturing, and they are working. This is an area where we have a lot of artisans and producers under one roof, and they're really trying to bring everyone together and identify how we can be more circular within this building, in this hub. As an example, we've been working with them how we could, for example, reuse wood waste from those local makers to make biochar that can be used on local ecological initiatives around the site. So these are just 3 of 9 examples. If you want to read more, of course, on our website, we have a lot of information on this. And what we have done with all of the pilots is follow a process that we call the CENTRINNO cartography. So for us, the CENTRINNO cartography is sort of a toolkit, or sometimes I also call it a journey, that help our pilots to map their urban ecosystem and then use this to build a more circular community. We will talk about this, of course, in the later presentation. So this is a bit of the context. And now I want to go a bit into the past, because CENTRINNO is a lot about heritage. And I've done a presentation in the past also in which we first thought about circularity and cities, how they used to be, and what we can really learn from what kind of circular ecosystems we want to build today within cities. So the first little story brings us to London in the 1960s. This used to be a time in which, of course, the Industrial Revolution was fully underway, and London in the Victorian age was especially famous for its paper industry. And during this time, there was a huge need and demand for new books and new paper, and the resources became very scarce around this. So what happened is that they had a whole system of so-called rag and bone men. These were men whose job it was to walk around the neighborhood and collect old rags from London's working class, and also bone remnants from animals as a resource for the paper industry. So it was a very decentralized network of these workers. Of course, I wouldn't call this circular today because the conditions were awful. But what is interesting is really that they had this decentralized, very organically organized network of rag and bone men who turned one of the, I think back then, the filthiest resources of rags into paper for education and knowledge exchange. The second story brings us to Paris around, I think, 80 years earlier. During that time, if we were to walk the streets of Paris, we would come across a lot of people at night who would shovel so-called night soil, which is just a euphemism for urban waste, human waste, into buckets. And they would bring those to cesspools outside of the city. And the government actually required those the farmers in the region to use that night soil as fertilizer. And what I find interesting about this story is that in the very beginning, they were really required to do this for hygiene purposes, because the city wanted it to be cleaner and make sure that there weren't any big outbreaks of disease. But later on, this resource became suddenly very, very valuable because the farmers could use it as a fertilizer, and the prices suddenly skyrocketed, and then farmers had to pay for human waste. What I find interesting about these 2 stories really is 2 things. One, they are really decentralized. So circular ecosystems in our past cities have been involving everyone. And the second thing is what we call waste or a valuable resource is dependent on the context and on our culture. And I want us to just remember those 2 things as we now travel through the presentation and back into the present. Okay, so just because I don't know all of your backgrounds, I think this is common knowledge, but I just want to maybe get a common definition of the circular economy. For me, the linear economy is, of course, the economy in which we are taking non-renewable or non-recyclable resources, and we usually make products out of them that we don't really need, just for them to be wasted, and so we have to buy new things. In contrast, when I speak about a circular economy, we think about a production system in which materials come from renewable resources or fully recyclable ones. They last a long time, and what I find really important is we actually need them. It's not just stuff we don't need, but it's really things that we need, especially from a Fab City perspective. When we talk about fabrication at the local scale, can we really think about what we really need and not just produce for the sake of producing? So the circular economy has gotten so much traction in the last years. There are just a few examples that I want to give process here from the European cities, in which many cities say now we want to become circular. Then there are bigger, massive companies like Apple, for example, who really try to use the concept of circularity for their own advantages. Here's an image of Daisy, the robot who can disassemble all of the tiny rare earth metals from phones. And we have, of course, a lot of startups in that space and innovators who are really populating the circular economy discourse. But there's a lot of buzz around the circular economy, and probably also still a lot of uncertainty what it really means. But one thing that is really apparent for us in Centrinno is that the circular debate isn't really a socially inclusive trend. So when we think about who's really profiting from the term and the buzz around it, it's a lot of these bigger businesses and institutions, but not really the people in Centrinno that we really want to empower. So, for example, think about the tailor next door, or all of these small repair shops that are already repairing computers or phones, or even a woodworker in a city who does very high quality work. So for us, it's really the question in Centrinno, why are those stakeholders left out in the discussion on the circular economy, and how can we really build a circular community and ecosystem in a fab city around those? And this is why we wanted to come up with a bit of a different vision or definition of what we think a circular ecosystem is. For us in Centrinno, circularity isn't really a perfect circle. It's rather a web, right? A web in which larger industries and smaller producers work together on exchanging knowledge and resources, on which we really let the value of resources trickle down to everyone in a city. That's why I shared those projects, the historical cases with you before. It's really about involving everyone in it. So in Centrinno, we have really been exploring with our pilots of how we can build these communities around resource and knowledge exchange, and not have this top-down view on circularity. Okay, so that was my long excursion. Thanks for staying with me on this. Before coming to what have fab cities to do with this. I hope it's quite obvious. In a fab city, this is taken from the website, it's a lot about producing the things that the city needs. And of course, to do that, we have to think about circularity, because the city doesn't grow as many resources as we usually consume. And I know no city can be ever 100% circular, but we do know that that circularity plays a huge part in creating a fabrication city. So our proposal is that fab cities especially can become really great facilitators of circular production and design communities within cities. And we have a few points of why we think from our work in Centrinno this is the case. We think that fab cities have a already super great network with a lot of local stakeholders on the ground, industry, education, governments. And we think that exactly at this interface, this is where we need to start building this community. Fab cities also have a lot of innovation capacity already with fab labs on site, a lot of good contact with integrating citizens and really the unheard voices, and therefore a really great starting point to make circular transition in cities or regions socially inclusive. So that's the entire background of why we think fab cities can be a great user of the Centrinno cartography. Coming back to our tool, so the cartography really is our support system of how can we really map and understand circular communities. And this is now what I want to spend more about for the next 10 to 15 minutes, and then we have a little bit of a discussion of what you think about this. So the Centrinno cartography is right now we are making a website in which we have several steps that everyone can follow to go from understanding your urban ecosystem and the challenges within this ecosystem towards mapping and building a circular community around your neighborhood. This is just a little preview of our website. The old version is available, and you can look it up on centrinno-cartography.org. But the new version will be published for Centrinno's last deliverable in a few months. So I really encourage you, if you are interested after this still, then you can check it out and you will get a lot of information on this. In this Centrinno cartography, we have three main parts that I want to talk to you about now. And for two of those parts, there are also two in-depth workshops with a few FAB cities in the future. So these are the first two parts that I'm going to present. The first one is called Becoming a Context Detective. So how can we build that really deep understanding around our neighborhood and our city or region to understand what challenges we actually need to solve with circularity. I have a Mentimeter here, so it would be super nice if you take a phone out or go to this code on Mentimeter, because then I'm gonna ask you a few questions just to make this a little bit more interactive and get your background, your knowledge on context mapping. So once you are there, I'm going to change the slide. Maybe somebody can give me a sign. I see some people already here. Okay. Great. Somebody who is not on there yet, then I'm going to wait a short bit more of a moment. All right. So my first question to you would be, okay, these might be old ones. First questions, rate how much do you agree to these statements? So I have three statements for you, and would be really great if you just give on a scale from 1 to 10 what you think, and then we can see the live change here, hopefully, on this website. First one, I have a really good understanding of urban ecological challenges, or regional. Now I have to always say regional. I have a good understanding of social challenges, and I know where to find data that describes urban, ecological, and social challenges. So I'm going to wait a few minutes for you to your best knowledge, answer this question. Interesting. I don't know how many people have answered yet. Maybe everyone, 11. Okay. Wait, I'm a bit impatient. Nice. So we can see here that it's what I find interesting is that the majority of you say you have a decent understanding of what environmentally isn't working in your cities, but less people actually know where the data is to find those. So that is actually something that I can completely subscribe also from our own pilots. We often have a lot of anecdotal knowledge on what are the problems within our city, but showing data to really show this is a huge challenge. And I think in Centrinno, we really struggled with the same. I have one more question. How much do you agree to these challenges? Our FAB City Hub, if you have one, if you don't have one, then you can maybe still answer, is contributing to address local social challenges, ecological challenges, or global ones. So I'm going to let you read those statements in detail and then hear your answers. Nice. Okay. Interesting. So here what we can see is things are still changing a little bit, but it seems that actually addressing very local challenges isn't that much of a focus, at least from the respondents, maybe more ecological than social challenges. I also find this an interesting question because with our FAB cities in Centrinno, we had sometimes a divide between, we know these are challenges, but we're working on this. And what I was trying to do during our work is really push them, try to understand, okay, what are the things we can do together to use the FAB City as also a vehicle to solve actual challenges within the city. So that's why I asked you that question. Thank you so much for this. I'm going to go back to I think this was the last one. Yes. I'm going to go back to the slides now to talk to you a little bit of what we have done in Centrino to become a context detective, as I call it. So in Centrino, we have spent probably the entire first year to do a lot of detailed geospatial analyses of the social context, the ecological context, a bit of economics too. And this has been very specific to each pilot. For example, for some pilots, we have mapped green space in the city and access to green space. For other pilots like this one that you can see here, this has been more from the material and urban mining analysis, in which we looked at wood waste within the neighborhood. We have also done, to understand the waste context, especially from a circular economy context, a lot of material flow analyses for each pilots, in which we mapped out what materials are used and where they're going. This example here is focusing on wood in the built environment. And the entire 2 years maybe even were quite a random analysis collection of what really matters, what should be mapped for each city to understand the context, which hasn't, as you can imagine, has been quite a big challenge, and we didn't come up with a lot of comparable insights. So what we have done in the last part of the project is that we need something that is a bit more comparable and maybe even approachable to map your context, your environmental and social context. And we have actually developed a easy to replicate model using the donut framework. I don't know if you're familiar with the donut economy. It's a combination of the planetary boundaries, in which we have the thought is basically we have an ecological ceiling to how many resources we can consume, what's our planet's capacities to still function. And if we move past those, we reach the tipping points that are not recommendable to go. And then we have also a social foundation. So what is the minimum that we need from social perspective to be safe, so to say? And within that inner ring, this is where we are safe. So we have made a similar model here for Centrino, in which we prepared research activities for each of those areas. Jette, yes, is there a question?
Yeah, a question from the chat actually. It says, are there open source tools for material flow analysis?
To my knowledge, I don't know of any. I don't know if Eva maybe knows of some, or you, Jette. I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either.
So, for example, this tool that I just showed you is a material flow analysis just based on a spreadsheet, right? So everyone can do it on a spreadsheet, it just in a Google Sheet. And then there are some tools, open source tool, like I think it's called Sankey Monkey or something, Sankey something, that is visualizing this as a Sankey diagram. That exists open source. But of course, getting something like this, what we have here, this graphic, you need a designer for that. So if there was an open source tool, I'm super interested also to know about this, but I don't know of any, unfortunately. So coming back to this donut, we noticed we wanted to have this approach because a lot of times our GIS skills, not everyone has those. And we wanted to empower others to get a really quick scan also on the context of climate, biodiversity, water, materials that everyone can do, and not only experts like us, because we knew in the end we would pass this on to people, and we wanted to have a ability for FAB cities to do like a quick assessment. These are the biggest challenges within my city. And that's what we've tested with all of our pilots. And what we've also done then is not only have like a research activity, for example, what's your waste generation for per person in the city, but also prompt them to connect this to local anecdotes, to make it really specific. What does water stress look like in my city, right? It's not only a number that you get from a map, but also can you somehow find anecdotes in newspaper or research articles that show you how water stress affects, for example, your farmers in the region or your neighborhood. To replicate this, we've done a really big, I love Miro boards. I'm a very big and good Miro board workshop facilitator. So we made a Miro board workshop that everyone can follow to make their own donut on this. And you don't have to do it all. You can dive into one area, for example, water, and then really dive into research activities that we provided to get an understanding of where we are. Let's move on. So this is the context mapping step, the one that we've done first. One of the more, I think, interesting things for us all is the going bottom up. So basically the other side of context mapping for us is the stakeholder mapping and the resource mapping. And this step we really try to understand who's already there in our neighborhood, in our region, in our city, who's working on a specific theme, for example, and can we somehow map their resources? And this could be their waste materials, their knowledge, their tools that are available for sharing. So we had a lot of different definitions of what we call a resource. But I would like you to do the same, to go back to the Mentimeter, and then we will have another short Mentimeter session. There is also a question, I think, right? Is there another question? While we are all waiting for people to join the next Mentimeter.
There's a question if it's possible to get access to the Miro board.
Yes, so the Miro board that I just presented will be on this website. Because you are all here early and you are our little test cases, you can get access to it earlier. I will share that with you afterwards, but it will be all on the website. I see several people coming in. Another question in the meantime?
Someone is asking about the Reflow project and if they maybe have MFAs. I think that's the question.
Maybe whoever asked that can specify Reflow. We also actually worked on in CENTRINNO. Metabolic was also part of this project. In this project, we have done a lot of material flow analyses for cities for one material, for example, plastics or wood or food. And this also is you can all read it on the link that's provided here, but it's a bit of a different focus than CENTRINNO. If you have a specific question around Reflow, maybe I can answer it. We will see. Okay, so in terms of stakeholder mapping, my first question to you is, have you, as part of your work, mapped stakeholders before? One person, yes. Okay. Okay, we have 9 out of 10 answers. It's a clear indication that stakeholder mapping has been a big part of most people's work. I'm going to wait a little bit more. I think everyone who was in has already answered. So yes, stakeholder mapping, there are many, many different ways to approach this. And at CENTRINNO, we have taken I think, maybe unique approach, which I will talk about now. But first of all, I would like those of you who've done it, those 9 people, maybe in one word, how have you done it? Have you, for example, done a diagram, a list? Maybe you can give a tiny response in just 2 words of how you've mapped stakeholders within your work. A mind map. Okay, Miro board. I love this answer already. Diagrams, lists, many lists, GIS maps. Okay, great, nice. So I've got 10 responses, many lists and some lists and maps. That is very interesting. I think for those of you who have done this before, I think it would be very interesting now to listen to what we have done in CENTRINNO. Let me go back to my presentation. So in CENTRINNO, we have started the process with mapping, first of all of the stakeholders that mattered. Each pilot had a bit of a focus, for example, the wool sector within their cities. And then we've mapped a lot of stakeholders around wool or wool innovation. Others have just been very local and said, okay, we are in Amsterdam North. Who are all of our craftspeople and makers and innovators within this area? So there was a spatial boundary around this. We helped all of the pilots with a spreadsheet that you can see here to classify and kind of categorize those stakeholders by types, for example. And then we have given them a description and a few tags, and we have a whole taxonomy there. And based on that first initial list, so this is where the list comes in, we decided with the pilots, okay, how can we really learn more about what these stakeholders have in resources, right? This has been a bit dependent on the pilot. Some pilots have sent out a survey to inquire, for example, what waste materials are available and if they're interested in waste resource sharing. Others have just done a door-to-door knocking and identified more in an open conversation with their stakeholders of what resources they have, what skills they have. This doesn't have to be an interview like, okay, what skills do you have? But they've really just engaged with the pilot, with the stakeholders to see what they could offer. And afterwards, we have codified this into the table. And then most importantly, we have used Kumu, which is an open software to map spreadsheets. And we have really made it very visual what is there. So Kumu allows you to create stakeholder maps spatially by just adding a location. And then you can make them very interactive. You can create filters, you can add photos, as you can see here. And this map, for example, that you see here is all just based on a spreadsheet. And what we have done this to make really interactive maps of the stakeholders and their communities around FAB City Hubs. I wanted to give a few examples because I think it's still quite vague of why we have done this. For example, in Iceland, we have at the country scale, not even at the city scale, mapped all of the stakeholders along the wool value chain, from farmers who are doing regenerative farming practices, to the wool processors, to designers who are using sustainable dyes, and to those who are innovating with alternative materials. So this map that we have here, you can see on top here, it says wool value chain. You can filter by step, and then you can see all of the stakeholders along the value chain very clearly. The second example comes from Tallinn again. Here we have mapped the circular economy skills in the local neighborhood. And we have used filters that you can, it's kind of a drop-down menu in which you can then select different skills that have been identified in the interview process. And this has been a really great tool for the pilot to really showcase, hey, this is all of the things we already have here. And based on that, then they have done really great programs on, for example, Soil Health Awareness Week, in which they brought together all of the stakeholders on soil health and made a local week around this. So they have used these maps as both an internal tool to understand this is what we have on site, as well as an external tool to, for example, discuss this with policymakers on who's there, who's locally available, and why do they matter in the discussion around the circular economy. The last example I want to share with you is Barcelona, in which I think they have done really quite a lot to map not only the resources in the wood system, but also potential connections. So the cool thing in Kumu is you can map connections between organizations, which is, I think, a very visual way to also show, for example, material flows or knowledge exchanges between. Yeah, so that's worked really, really well to create these interactive maps. That you can also see a lot of them on our website if you want to play with them and see how different they are, but also what's the opportunity. Challenging maybe it was to collect the data because it does take time to go around and identify people's resources. But what I think want to just say is that it is it's about the process, right? You're building trust in the community by doing that, and you're building just partnerships and getting ideas, even if you're not putting it on a map after. It's really about the engagement around a topic with stakeholders. We have a lot of replication tools ready for you too. A guidebook to follow this, a template for stakeholder mapping, and then you can create your free account in Kumu and link you basically just link the spreadsheet to our Kumu map, and then you get your own map. It's quite nice and hopefully works really well for those of you who want to learn more about this. The last one, and then I promise we have time for questions. Once we have all of the data, we had to think, okay, what do we do with this now, right? How do we find circular synergies between stakeholders? And especially those that also solve those challenges that we mapped in the first step. So what we have done is quite in-depth workshops, which each pilots in which we looked at the bird's eye challenges from a city, the local skills, and we tried to really find out how to connect the stakeholders with the Fab City Hub to find opportunities. This has sometimes worked, sometimes it was a bit challenging, of course, but we do have also, I think, one of the nicest mural boards that you can also get access to, in which we make an attempt, at least, because we are, of course, not there to handhold people, but an attempt to structure an idea around opportunity finding and for circular systems. So this will also be available for you on the website afterwards. Okay, so yeah, one last thing. We also have a interactive library of all of the cases that our pilots have worked out, that they are currently working on. And you can also access this through the website later on. This is a Kumu map, actually, where you can look into the different opportunities that pilots have identified. And we have a lot of blog posts and pilot stories, which will hopefully also give an idea for you how to do that. Okay, so this was, again, a bit of a longer discussion than we had, but we still have 13 minutes, and I wanted to just really take that time to hear your thoughts. I have a few questions, of course, that would be interesting for me to know. Above all, what is the role if you have a Fab City Hub of the circular economy in this right now, and which parts of this cartography process do you think speak to you, and how could you adopt this in your own work? You can now raise your hand and just speak out. You don't have to use the chat for this, but we will also monitor the chat for questions. Yes. Aristarco from Puebla.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question. Do you start collecting data from existing databases, from government information, and from there you start to search for particular ones that are that could be paramount for the initiative, that could be interesting for the initiative, or you just go to the field and see what you can find? So
what we have done with these donut models, we have made research, we call them research activities because of the context-detective analogy, in which we linked it to public databases. For example, one activity is for water stress, for example. It's just depending on whether you're in the EU or outside, you're either going to the EU Water Framework Directive or the Water Risk Atlas, and then we help you to just collect the data from there. So that's our approach, that we try whenever we can to make a quick assessment using public data. But sometimes we also say, okay, you have to go to your local data collection, like local website on statistics, for example, to find information on waste data, because of course these things aren't globally available, but you have to dig deeper a bit locally. I don't know if that answers your question. There's another question in the chat about the website. It will be available, we think, around October. The official deadline is December, but October will be when it's already there, but we will revamp it now quite significantly with what you have seen now. And with whether it is multilingual, well, we are making it in English now. I think that the website itself, the text in it, can just, of course, be translated with the website translate. But currently it is going to be in English. Yes. Wolf.
Hi, Francie. Yeah, thanks for your very nice presentation. It was really nice, really interesting. So like circular economy was for sure quite important topic in the last years for Fab City Hamburg. One of the point I'm really struggling probably for Fab City in Hamburg, but more in general in Fab City is the question of scaling. As it's somehow, so most of our stakeholders are quite small stakeholders which have a probably big potential of innovation, but a very weak impact on economics.
Yes.
How do you see the how do you say the transition? Because I believe like really on economical impact, it's won't be enough.
Yeah.
And okay, maybe this is enough for a first question.
Yeah, no, this is also something that I think we struggled in the Centrino pilots quite a lot with, that there are at the neighborhood scale, at the local scale, a lot of great initiatives. And of course, from a top-down perspective, there's just a drop in the bucket. And the niche aspect of the innovators is a bit of a challenge, right? So I think the transition between that, that's exactly where the facilitator role comes in, of organizations who can then connect with, for example, policymaking. An example in Amsterdam here, we have a pilot which mapped all of the local organizations in Amsterdam North, and then created a platform for these local people who are, of course, not doing, they won't bring the city to a circular state, but they are part of it. And we organized this roundtables and really public debates with policymakers and local stakeholders to understand what are the enabling conditions from a city scale, from a policy perspective, that help whether it's innovators or just local organizations who are doing good things to remain in a place. Here it's especially pressured from gentrification and increasing rental prices and everything. But so the pathway through policy and understanding what are the regulations and maybe also the legislations that need to be in place for these business models to exist or be encouraged, I think is extremely important. But I do see the challenge, and I think this is also something that I think in Fab cities in general, what is the ambition, right? Is the ambition to stay at a very small scale, or is the ambition to kind of make it a citywide network or something that has really impact at the city scale? Yeah, still to be seen. I don't know if that helps you at all or not, but I will just look into the chat for another question.
Thank you.
Data collection forms are a great part of this work. How do you authenticate this data you use? Nana, do you mean that how do we make sure the data is correct that are collected by the stakeholders? Okay, so this is a tricky one. So what we have done, of course, in Centrino is we have done a bottom-up data collection process. So we were at a bit of an at a crossroad in the beginning. Do we try to top-down map material flows, that one that I showed you, for the entire city? And if we do this, why, right? Why are we doing this? To show this beautiful Sankey diagram. If the people who are who can change how a resource flows are individual organizations, right? So that's why we switched and said, okay, let's take data collection more bottom up and go to the local stakeholders that we know could change something, or an industry that could change something. We don't authenticate this, of course, when you are reaching out to an organization, you have to, we don't say, are you really, how do you say this? you have to kind of trust them that they're saying what they're saying. But in Centrino, they didn't have a reason to say something else, because it is only those who are really interested in changing flows, for changing resource consumption, who gave the data to begin with, right? We didn't force data out of an organization who didn't want to share something. So the short answer is we didn't really authenticate the data in that sense. Maybe we should have, but it is quite qualitative in the beginning. It's not data. Our data wasn't, for example, we are using 5,302 tons of X material, but it was more like, yeah, we're using a lot of this material. Maybe we can now work together to find a partner how to solve this. So it is more like a human approach, not so much like a super hardcore data approach based on numbers. Does that help you? Okay.
Yes, that answers my question. Thank you.
Great. Are there any other comments or questions or thoughts on which parts of this process you might be interested in to explore further? Yes, I see one more hand raised.
Yeah, do you map also what is going to the landfills? I mean, taking, I don't know, noticing if there's one specific material that is going to the landfills that could be recycled or upcycled.
Yeah, we have mapped that in. So we have done in the end also some of these top-down MFAs, material flow analyses, that map where things are going. And then we do map what's going to landfills, what's going to recycling plants, what's going to other composting, for example. Here, maybe coming back to the problem of data, we have also some cities in which we just knew we couldn't trust the data as much. So we had landfill data and we had some sort of high-level overview of what goes where. But you could also, we heard from our local partners that this data isn't to be trusted, that we got from the public organizations. So that is, of course, always a challenge. You can map what data is given to you, but if for example, there is a city and they seem to recycle 98% of their materials, then you know already this is not really the true story. So this material flow analysis approach is really dependent on the quality of your data and how trustworthy it is. Yeah, but we do map usually things and how much goes to landfill. How does the data get maintained, updated, modified? This is a question. I think it depends. So again, we have the bottom-up data in Kumu in this spreadsheet on which is really easily updated by everyone who has access to the data spreadsheet, right? So our pilots have made these stakeholder maps, and they can just continuously add data as they go to it or update it, but it's really in your own hands to do that. The top-down data, these MFAs and spatial analyses, that is a bit of a challenge because we are usually doing them once and we are not doing them again. And of course, in 2 years, it can look different. And that is something that takes a long time to update. And this is also, I think, a challenge with the top-down approach, because we can't, like, we don't have the resources, for example, in one EU project to go back to the same city and do it again. So if you are a city, I think it would be in the responsibility of the city to kind of update that data. But if it's just a private organization or an NGO, then usually it's outside of the scope of most projects to come back to the data and update it. But these bottom-up processes, we have some pilots who are now using their Kumu maps and their spreadsheets to really build on them over time, which is very nice. We are now at the hour. I hope that it was useful for some of you. And I wanted to just say, if you have any other specific questions, or thoughts on, I think it would be still be really interesting for us to hear which parts of the cartography you find interesting. And then I will send out, if you are interested, the link to the materials that I mentioned within this website, in this presentation. And maybe I see some of you in the workshops. I don't know if some of you have signed up for the actual in-depth workshops to do some tools. Are there any last questions or comments? Otherwise, I'm wishing you all a good evening or good morning, depending on where you are.